need. But I also think that that is reflective of like, the total size of what we analyzed, and that will get refined down
Thank you,
through
Stella.
the process. So I think
It wouldn't happen all at once.
right,
Oh.
and I think it would kind of, I think it would work itself out. That's my suspicion. But we need to get through. So not only do we need to kind of get through this discussion tonight, we'll want to get some public input on the potential for adding that to the UGA. We need to talk to the county, and we need to get the final land capacity numbers from TRPC. So I'll go over all of that a little bit, but just like the comparison from this one to the south area that we looked at last time is like triple cost. So.
All right. I'll wait to hear about it.
TBD. Next steps.
Are we rolling?
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
We're ready whenever you are.
I'd like to call to order the May 15th, 2024 meeting of the Tenino Planning Commission. Let the record show that all commissioners are present with the exception of Alex Murray and Nellie Stanzel. Is that right?
Darnella, yeah.
Darnella. She goes by Nellie. Yeah, Darnella. Okay, so do we need to actually vote on the excusal? I don't think we've ever done that before. Let's look at the agenda. Move past that.
I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Okay, we've got some meeting minutes from March.
Look good to me.
Looks good.
Move to approve the minutes as presented.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Okay, moving on. Let's see here. Do you want to make a public comment?
No, actually, I thought Dan Penrose was going to be here. I had a question I had to ask him.
Oh, okay. We do have representatives from SCJ here.
I am trying to get a short plat approved over on Green Street. I have 3 copies of the short plat map with my signature, Nick's signature, and then the land surveying company that did it. I think the next step is for it to go to the city and get all those signatures done, and then before it goes to you guys, there's some more signatures needed on this. And so I submitted an application a while ago, and I was going to check in with Dan to see where that was, and I need to pay the fee and just get this process moving. So I think all of those are questions for him.
Are you Nicole?
I am, yes.
Okay, yeah, I can definitely take that and distribute it to the people who need to have it signed.
Okay, excellent. Okay. So is that what you do then? Cool, thanks. And then I'm just going to get out of your guys' hair.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, any reports from the administration? No? Okay, moving on. We don't have a public hearing today, so unfinished business. Climate Policy Advisory Team update.
Yes, I will be updating the commission on what the climate policy advisory team got up to in the last couple months and what you can expect from, going forward. My name is Reese, by the way. If anyone forgot, I'm an employee of SCJ Alliance. Just to bring everyone up to speed on what the Climate Policy Action Team is, it's a group of local stakeholders who were identified as being capable of helping the city engage in development for long-range climate policy. In achieving this task, this group helped to identify local assets, vulnerabilities, and then characterize risk in the area, specifically as it relates to climate change. The purpose of the formation of this team was to develop policy that will go into the city's comprehensive plan, which we will return with in draft form for review later this year. We are engaging in climate policy work now because it's mandated by the state due to new legislation passed last year. And climate policy will be a core element of the comprehensive plan update. The Climate Policy Action Team met 3 times to date, once in January, February, and March. And there will be a 4th meeting scheduled for the fall, the date of which is to be determined. And that meeting will be an opportunity for the team to review the draft climate element, provide any feedback before we then present it to the Planning Commission and then eventually the City Council. So now I'm just going to go over kind of like a synopsis of each of the meetings and kind of what we achieved across them. In the first meeting, it was really kind of bringing the team up to speed. So we reviewed the process of developing a comprehensive plan and kind of what are the outcomes that a comp plan achieves. We reviewed the legislation that forms the basis of long-range climate planning in Washington and some of the more broader themes and concepts of planning for climate change. And we ended on a discussion of how this can work for Tenino, how it can kind of fit into the local planning efforts underway here, as well as establishing some goals for the group and goals for the final element as well. In the February meeting, this was all about identifying kind of the things that make Tenino what it is and establishing methods through planning of ensuring that they remain, they have longevity to them despite some anticipated changes to the climate. So this is included identifying assets that would meet Commerce's 11 priority asset sectors. These are sectors that the Department of Commerce identifies as being representative of everything that embodies a community, from its transportation and its zoning to including also cultural practices and waste management, economic development, just meant to be the universe of what a community is. Along with this, we also explored some of the anticipated hazards given certain emissions scenarios and how they specifically relate to Tenino and Thurston County. These anticipated climate hazards are going to both have very granular impacts on a fine scale, as well as being quite large in scale too, but some are less relevant than others. For example, sea level rise is not the biggest priority for the city of Tenino to plan for. Given that we determined what are some of the assets we want to protect, what are some of the hazards that jeopardize them, we were then able to pair the assets and the hazards and determine the level of acceptable risk in this community. So that was the February meeting. The March meeting was all about reviewing the existing comprehensive plan and determining if there are any gaps in some of the coverage that relate to the exposure of the assets that we identified in the February meeting. So what I brought along is the sort of interactive sort of activity that we had. So this is 3 of the 6 elements, as well as the other 3 here. And on the top is the priority hazards that the Department of Commerce has identified. And as we went along, we would determine that, for example, the capital facilities element, policy 7.1, does provide adequate coverage for flooding. And anywhere that we didn't deem as having adequate coverage, we then suggested potential policy options to fill those gaps in. I'm going to leave this behind with me if anyone wants to review it for themselves. But yeah, this is kind of like a very visual example of the kind of feedback that we are looking for with the climate policy action team. Just getting some ideas for policies that could be really effective in this community. So now probably what everyone's more interested in, what are the next steps for the CPAC? For now, the staff members of SCJ are going to be completing Commerce's Climate Element Workbook. What this is a multi-page spreadsheet that is meant to take much of the feedback and input that I was able to receive from the Climate Policy Action Team, pair it with some level of analysis that's a little bit over my head personally. But the more important thing is that submission of this completed workbook is the deliverable that Commerce wants to see in order to then distribute the grant funding for climate planning to the city. So that is ongoing. Additionally, this summer, we will also actually, probably sooner than later, but over the course of the summer, we'll be working to take everything that we heard from the CPAT and then put it into a draft climate element. And that element will then be submitted back to the CPAT for that final fall meeting that I mentioned earlier, where they'll be able to review it and let us know if we were on the mark or if anything has changed since the last time we met. Leading then into presentation of the draft element to the Tenino Planning Commission. I'd be happy to take any questions that y'all may have, but if not, I'm going to stick around for the land use alternative presentation as well, and then I'll be hitting the road.
Nice, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Reese. Okay. So, all right, here we go. I am back. If you don't remember me, my name is Christina. Sorry that we missed last month, and thanks for your flexibility in getting this month rescheduled. So we are talking more about housing needs, land capacity analysis, and growth scenarios. I do have a couple of other things that I've squeezed into this presentation. One kind of unrelated to the comp plan, which is a briefing on some floodplain regulations, and then a further update on some meetings with the Thurston Regional Planning Council. So I'm going to start with floodplain regulations, get that out of the way, and then we'll roll right into comp plan stuff. So we were contacted by the Department of Ecology asking if we would be willing to update the floodplain regulations in Tenino because Tenino is currently out of date and therefore not eligible for the National Flood Insurance Program. To become eligible for the NFIP, the city needs to adopt the current FEMA mandated regulations. There were some updates that were started in 2022. I'm not sure what the backstory is there, but they were never fully adopted. So we've been asked to please consider adopting current regulations. The Department of Ecology conducted a community assistance call with city staff in March and provided some recommendations for updates that would bring us into compliance to become eligible for the NFIP.
I'm sorry, who did that call?
Who at the city?
Yeah.
So we had
Sorry, who with the city?
who with
Like the
the Department of Ecology.
Gotcha.
Sorry. Yes. The Department of Ecology held a community assistance call back in March, and they also reviewed the floodplain ordinance, provided all of the recommended updates. We reviewed them, asked a few clarification questions, and at this point we are preparing to present those recommendations to City Council for adoption. The regulations are very, very similar to the process that was conducted in 2022. So we weren't planning to bring it back to Planning Commission for more workshopping. It just doesn't, since it pretty much substantially went through the process here, in order to speed things along and become eligible for the NFIP, we're planning to bring it directly to City Council.
What sorts of shortcomings do we have?
There are some outdated definitions. There are some regulations for non-residential structures that need to be amended. There's some broad cleanup. I can bring it up if you're interested, or I can send it out with the next packet. There are some big changes to some of the development standards for certain kinds of structures. Overall, they don't affect a huge number of properties in Tenino, and the kinds of development that we would be expecting are probably not going to fall within some of the more substantial changes.
And does this apply to structures within the 100-year floodplain, or what kind of floodplain would affect?
Yeah, so that's a great question. The regulations apply to everything within the special flood hazard area, which is the 100-year floodplain, and also the floodway, that's the area that floods regularly, right? Versus in a 100-year storm event. So anything within those two floodplain zones would be regulated under the floodplain development regulations.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's any structure, any development activity like fill or other kinds of grading that could potentially affect floodplains or flood capacity. So it's pretty comprehensive in its applicability, but overall, I expect it to have a fairly minimal impact on the kinds of development activities that are happening in Tenino, just because we have comparatively fewer properties within those, and many of them have adequate upland area that we would just not expect to see tons and tons of development in the floodplain.
Sure.
Yeah.
Follow up to that. So anybody who's currently has a structure within, is there anybody that's going to be impacted that has a structure within that floodplain already? Or are they going to have to go back and adjust something on their land, or are they okay to leave?
They will be required to come into compliance when they experience any kind of substantial destruction or major renovation,
Sure.
which is typically something that exceeds, if I remember right, I think it's anything that exceeds 60% of the valuation.
Okay.
So that gives you plenty of room for renovation of existing structures without needing to consider how you might elevate or otherwise do some flood proofing for that structure.
Okay.
But in the event that somebody does want to knock down a building and reconstruct, they're going to have to come into compliance. If they do want to do a major addition, that would be have to be in compliance with the new regulations.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
But the NFIP does provide some excellent benefits for property owners and for the city. So noted here in the orange box, there is affordable flood insurance offered for people that do have structures. Right now, that's either unavailable or extremely expensive. So having that as an option can be a big benefit for those property owners. NFIP participation also makes the city eligible for certain federal grants and programs in the event of some kind of disaster or emergency. So that's another great benefit of participation. So once we get through City Council and they've adopted the final ordinance, we've had some discussions with the mayor about ways to notify property owners that this is now available for them and that they can obtain affordable flood insurance. And that'll be kind of that for that process.
So just to double check my understanding, so when these new rules are implemented, no one is going to be immediately affected in the sense that they need to make changes if they're already existing. The changes will be if they want to build something or they need to do renovations, or if there is a disaster and the cleanup afterwards.
They have to do something that's 60% of the existing value, including
Yeah.
structures and land.
Or a structure,
Just
60%
structures.
of the one structure that they're
Right.
working on, or any one structure that
So
they're
if it's
working on.
worth $100,000 and they wanna do $61,000 of the stuff, they gotta come into compliance.
Yeah. But nobody's required to immediately retrofit upon adoption.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that would be extremely burdensome. So it's going forward, new development activities that meet a certain threshold or new construction.
Mhm.
Any other questions on this? All right, great. Then let's turn our attention back to the comprehensive plan. So some of this is going to be fairly familiar from March, but I figured since it's been a little bit of time, I'd like to go back over some of the background information about the land capacity analysis. It's also very technical, so feel free to pause me for questions along the way. I don't mind at all. Okay, so as a reminder, in 2021, the legislature passed HB 1220. This is the bill that required everyone to plan for certain affordability levels instead of just a single housing target. The allocations are now spread out among several affordability bands. Cities have to show that there's sufficient capacity within the city and also within the UGA to accommodate their allocated units within those income bands. And we also have to consider what barriers there are present in the development regulations and within city policies that would prevent developing within these different income levels. We'll be doing a full analysis, including that barriers analysis, as part of the comp plan update. The Thurston Regional Planning Council is the body that is facilitating the allocation of housing units across Thurston County. This is a separate organization that has invited all of the jurisdictions to the table to talk about what kind of allocation makes sense. They started with the Department of Commerce's recommended methodology and broke that down into some options for discussion and refinement by all of the jurisdictions. This table is where we landed for the city of Tenino. So the total housing unit need in 2045 is in the top, and I'm showing that by what should be present in the city and what should be present in the urban growth area. What we've got already in the 2020 supply, so granted there's been a little bit of development in the years since then. So what's the 2020 supply is there for the city and UGA. What's shown at the very bottom of this table is the unit need, or essentially what we need to plan for in this comprehensive plan. So we've got a total of 528 units in the city and UGA, so 519 in the city, 9 in the UGA, and those are spread out among various affordability bands with the largest shares of those units in the higher area median income bands, so in the 80 to 100, 100 to 120, and 120% plus categories, and also some in the supportive housing categories, the 0 to 30% with or without supportive services. The city's also been allocated 9 emergency housing beds. One thing that I do want to mention that was discussed in the housing allocation meetings is that the supportive services are typically going to be most present in Olympia, Lacey, and Tumwater. That was acknowledged by those communities as well. We still need to plan to accommodate this, but there are no penalties if it doesn't get built in the city. So we need to make sure that there is land available that could accept these kinds of developments. We need to make sure that there are no barriers to building them, but if the market says that this isn't the right place for these kinds of projects, there's no problem, no penalty for them not appearing here.
And remind me, when you say housing units, that's one like residence, not how many bedrooms, correct?
Correct, yeah. So, especially in like the 30 to 50, 50 to 80, like the lower, these are gonna be often smaller units. They're gonna be the multifamily units. The higher end of this spectrum is gonna be your townhouses and your single detached unit developments.
Oops.
We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. Okay, so the last time I was here, we talked through the land capacity analysis. We've done a preliminary job to be able to advance the planning process. We're almost halfway through the 2-year update schedule envisioned by Commerce, and we, Thurston Regional Planning Council is preparing kind of the official land capacity analysis, but they're not planning to have that until later this summer. So we've done some preliminary work. What they are working on is providing a final land capacity analysis. So they will have preliminary information for discussion and presentation to the city in late June or early July. They will allow for further discussion and revisions on that through the late summer and finalize everything this fall. So we didn't really want to wait that long. And we have enough information at this point to start talking about land use scenarios and to advance the planning process a little more quickly.
And what is the product of the land capacity analysis?
It's a report.
And sorry, what does that report tell us?
Okay, yeah. The report will talk about what land is available within each jurisdiction for different kinds of development.
Gotcha.
It's like an explanation of how we're going to meet the needs that we need to for housing, or that's not what it is?
It's essentially like a gap analysis. So it talks about where we're adequate and where we're deficient. It doesn't provide the solutions for each community. So we decide collectively how Tenino wants to address deficiencies in capacity. And each community is responsible for their own decision making. So it's more of an adequacy and a gaps analysis where it highlights the problem.
And then it gives us guidance on like what rezoning is needed or things like that?
Not necessarily. I'm not sure what they're planning for the final deliverable. It may include some recommendations or some options to address capacity issues, but those are really local decisions that each community needs to make for itself, right? We talked last time about what some options could be, whether we wanted to look more at infill or if we wanted to look at expanding the UGA or some kind of blended option. And TRPC isn't going to tell us what to do within that spectrum.
Gotcha.
Okay. Any other questions on TRPC's role or what we should be expecting from them? Okay. So our land capacity analysis, the preliminary analysis methodology, follows the Department of Commerce's guidance. This uses zoning and land supply assumptions from TRPC's 2019 report, Population and Employment Land Supply Assumptions. The analysis followed these 3 steps. First, we identify vacant and redevelopable parcels. We apply some reduction factors that I'll go through in the coming slides, and then we identify land capacity by income band. So identifying vacant and redevelopable parcels is essentially a GIS exercise. We take the parcel data, we look for parcels that have no structures or structures with very low valuation. Anything less than $50,000 is classified as vacant for the purposes of this exercise. We remove things with a designated use like a park that would otherwise flag as vacant. We consider that to be developed. So those get removed. We're left with a bunch of vacant parcels. We also identify redevelopable land, which is developed land that has a high likelihood for redevelopment. So something like a very old single-family house in the middle of town, we would say, okay, that's probably going to redevelop as something a little bit more intensive in the future. This is what it looks like for the city of Tenino. So the vacant parcels are in pink, the redevelopable parcels are in green. We've got 109 vacant parcels and 79 redevelopable parcels. The next step is to apply the reduction factors. So we remove critical areas, which is a pretty significant chunk of land here in Tenino. Those include everything within the 100-year floodplain. It includes areas of steep slopes or other kinds of landslide or geologic hazards, wetlands with an assumed 200-foot buffer, streams that are fish-bearing with an assumed 150-foot buffer, and we have a modified deduction for pocket gopher preferred soils. So we take those out. We also reduce the amount of vacant and redevelopable land to account for infrastructure needs. So we assume that new development is going to need room for roads and stuff like that. So we also make a deduction for that. TRPC's assumptions had us use a factor of 35% for residential zones as the reduction factor here. So here's the critical areas map. These are the areas that get deducted. And what we wind up with is a map that looks like this. So you can see from a few slides ago compared to this one, we've got quite a bit less land available in the vacant and redevelopable parcels here. Then we take a look at what the potential capacity is for that remaining area to be developed, and that is based on what the zoning is for those parcels. So across all residential zones, the city has about 293 units of available capacity that could be developed, as well as 44 in the commercial and mixed-use zones, for a total of 337 units of capacity. So that doesn't quite achieve what our allocations are. So we know that we're going to need to explore some options. Last time we talked about this, it was requested that we provide some information about what the area median income is with respect to those income bands. So I provided the breakdown here. So we've got the area median income. I actually didn't put that exact number on the slide. It's $102,500 is the area median income, and that is used as the calculation to break down what we're planning for in the region for these different income bands. So people making $123,000 or greater would be in that highest income band, and then it gets progressively less as we go down. All right, then mapping out the land capacity by income band, we assign the kinds of housing that is allowed within those zones to the categories that serve these different income levels. This is based on the Department of Commerce's recommendation. So single family, low density development is typically going to serve people at a higher income level. Multifamily units are typically going to serve people in a lower income level. Some kinds of multiplex units can be accessible to some of the lower income bands with government assistance or vouchers or something of that nature. So there's a little bit more accessibility within some of the higher density zones to serve some of the lower income populations.
So sorry, I have a question.
Yes.
So looking at this compared to the projected housing needs, so in the 120 plus, it says we need 208 units. So we need And then looking at this, that's just a single family, not duplex or like townhomes. So that's saying that we need to find space for 208 detached single family homes to be built.
We are saying that is, the kinds of people at higher incomes are more likely to be served by these kinds of units. So when we're looking at capacity, essentially, yes, we're looking for enough land to build that many units at a density that's allowed in the code. Yeah. And there are some other code amendments that could address that without having to look for more land supply by, for example, allowing a smaller lot size and more density. That may or may not feel acceptable for this community. So we can talk about what some of those options look like to get that capacity. Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
All the way back to step 1 in the map.
So I noticed that my house is in the redevelopable area, but you said it was if they had a value of 50,000 or less? Or is it
Vacant.
also because my block is zoned multifamily, even though there's no multifamily on it? Is
Yes.
that why?
Yeah, so your
Because it's definitely,
area.
I'm paying more
Yeah.
market value than 50,000.
Yeah, no, so
That's the
vacant land.
that's the vacant.
Yeah, vacant land is the one where it's got very low valuation on
Oh,
the
I see.
structures. Redevelopable
Yeah,
is
sorry.
where there's
I
higher.
misunderstood.
Yeah.
I was like,
Wait a minute.
hold on.
Hold on a minute. I gotta call the tax assessor. No,
Okay.
the redevelopable land is essentially like where is there a greater market potential
Yes.
than maybe what's currently present there.
And also, I don't want to keep coming back to this, but is the manufactured home community behind Dave's not redevelopable? Because it's not marked as redevelopable, although I would say it at least should be considered potentially redevelopable. I mean,
So I had a meeting with TRPC
Yeah.
to talk about the land capacity analysis. I asked this question. They had some similar concerns. So although it is technically redevelopable, from a planning and policy level, they would prefer to protect those kinds of uses as some of the most affordable ownership options available in communities.
but
It would.
it's our low income option, and we're saying that's multifamily generally speaking, but those are essentially single family residences on individual lots, so it doesn't really add up exactly. I mean, if
It is.
everything else that we're considering to be true is true, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's
it
taking
will-
up a hell of a lot of space.
It is taking up a lot of
For what
space.
it
I'm
is.
certainly not gonna argue with you on that. It is amongst the most affordable ownership options.
They don't own, they just own the buildings, though
Right.
somebody owns the land, so.
Yes, so they're still owning an asset. There's some debate about kind of like the value of that, especially with the depreciation
Right.
that those kinds of structures often have. But it is something that is very affordable for some families. Displacement of that would impact the allocations that we have. So the loss of that manufactured home park means we need to account for those units somewhere else in the community. And so
But we're also looking for 200 plus single family residential lots to build the higher level income houses on, which is gonna take a lot of land, whereas we could have everybody in one smaller lot, all the people that live there now in a smaller lot, if we had an affordable housing, like multifamily place. Maybe that's not as desirable, but I mean, at the same time, do we have to do we have to avoid like even ever talking about it, and in exchange look for places that are outside of town to continue to spread out to accommodate the higher end single family residences? I mean,
we don't have to
at all
avoid.
of our expense in some way.
Yeah, we don't have to avoid talking about it. It's essentially cautionary. We would need, in the event that we did want to explore redevelopment on this parcel, we would need to think about displacement risk and strategies for those people and make sure that we are adjusting our allocations to account for that. So,
But it's all owned by one individual now who rents out all those lots to the individuals who own the buildings on those lots, right? So it would still be up to that one business or whatever that owns it all to redevelop. And, you know, I don't know that it's like Section 8 housing or if they're getting like federal assistance, the landowner, but I don't think so, but maybe they are. And so they can't change it or they won't change it, but if they're not, then there's nothing keeping them from doing whatever they want, right? So it's like, to not consider it as potentially redevelopable to me seems like, I mean, we're just kind of ignoring like a big hunk of land in the middle of town that would be potentially redevelopable.
yeah, the guidance that I got was to encourage protecting the manufactured home park in the event that we do want to explore
But
redevelopment
we can't
alternative.
protect it. That's kind of like my
Well, there
point,
are
I
some
guess.
tools that can be used to protect it from a zoning perspective. There are some incentives that could be offered depending on how much the city wants to put
What
towards
is its current zoning?
Yeah, I was gonna ask that.
That's a good question. I mean, what more incentive could we give them except you don't have to pay any sewer fees? I mean, what else do we
That's a
got
pretty good
to offer
incentive,
them? I mean,
That's a
yeah,
big
so-
incentive right now.
we're
Yeah,
all
right.
like people who live here are basically subsidizing that being in town to a certain extent, and I just wonder to what extreme do we have to go to protect it when we don't own it and we can't keep the current property owner from doing it, so from redeveloping it.
Yeah, I mean, we don't
Yeah.
have to do.
It would certainly change our numbers and our
It would.
equations substantially.
I think when she says, so I think there's two pieces here. One,
Yeah.
TRPC is a quasi-governmental entity that does have some sort of final say, because all of the municipalities in the county at one point, I believe, signed an MOU that granted them permissions. So at the end of the day, almost all of our comp plans go to TRPC for at least some sort of approval of certain parts, I believe. The housing analysis and housing allocation being one of those. So when TRPC is telling us to try to protect those, that's kind of tipping their hand potentially that they're going to tell us that's not acceptable.
But wouldn't they have to justify that other than just saying it makes our numbers wonky and we want to show that we have low income housing in this?
There's nothing preventing us from considering it as redevelopable. If we do consider it as redevelopable or plan for it to redevelop, we do need to account for those units somewhere else in our land capacity analysis
Because then
and
it goes back
our
to
growth assumptions.
But then we
Because then
can.
it goes back to
And
this.
we
How?
also need to consider some displacement policies around that. So there's not a prohibition on
So
it.
would
Their
we would just have to
preference
accommodate multifamily somewhere else?
we need
Or in the
or-
exact same spot?
Or in the exact same spot, yes. So
Yeah,
we need to think about it. Their strong recommendation to me is that I encourage protection of that space. But again, there's nothing that would prevent us from considering.
What would they,
Something
and they,
else.
you anticipate
They're
that
not
they
gonna,
would
they're
reject
not
it
gonna
and
reject
say,
our plan over it, especially if we do account for those units somewhere else and we think about displacement policies and how we can assist people in finding a different place in the community, right? Like, every community member is valuable and offers something
Yes.
to the city, and it would be great if they
I'm not
do.
disputing that.
Right, if they do get kicked out of the manufactured home park, like if they could find a different home somewhere in the community. So we wanna make sure that we are providing opportunities for that and policies that would support that internal relocation versus them having to go to some other community, right? So as long as we're doing that, our plan's not gonna be rejected.
From my opinion, I feel like I'm neither here nor there on the manufacturing homes. Like, I think
I just don't want to spread out if we don't have to and ignore obvious things like Mima Acres and the manufactured home community and talk about moving the UGAs north and south and way outside of town, and that's just gonna be more infrastructure that the people who live here have to pay for,
Yeah.
and, you know, through taxes and all that good stuff, and ignore obvious things that need to be protected, or people down there don't want to be in the city, or,
Yeah.
you know, different reasons why we can't ever talk about that. I mean, those things aren't gonna, the manufactured home community is probably not gonna be there forever. Can we agree to that at least? Like, someday it probably, in spite of all of our protections, whatever that means,
Yeah.
it won't be there, probably, or it'll looks completely different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we need affordable housing now, I get it, and us considering it isn't redeveloping it. I
Yeah,
mean, it's
right.
not, you know, that's just
Yeah,
saying,
at the end of the day,
like,
it's
we
always
need to
comes
show,
down-
we're doing like here, we have this to develop in multifamily, we got this for single family, and that's the exercise that we're doing. We're not saying
Yeah.
all these are gonna be developed in this way or that way, we're just saying we can accommodate this stuff.
Yeah.
And if we're saying, we're not gonna even try to accommodate any of these things in half of the town, and we're gonna try to accommodate all these things outside of town
Yeah.
and on the edges, or, you know, in the area that's left that we're willing to talk about. I just don't understand why we would do that when, generally speaking, people in this town have always wanted a small town feel and, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But, you know,
I mean,
TRPC, obviously they don't care if we spread all the way to
right.
Tumwater and all the way
Yeah.
to Grand Mound, if it, you know, what difference does it make to them? They don't
Yeah.
care, and who cares, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know.
So did we come down, are those zones single family down there?
Sorry, we haven't quite gotten there yet.
Okay.
Let me pull up the zoning
I feel like it'd be an interesting question to ask.
I don't want to like kick anyone out. That's
Yeah.
not what I'm talking
No.
about.
Yeah, yeah, and
I just don't want to.
Yeah.
I want to
Yes.
play with all the pieces
Yes.
in
Right.
the game. I don't want to pretend like we can't do this or
Yeah.
that. Like, I don't understand the point of that.
And I definitely don't think you're anti them, so
I'm good, thank you.
yes, I do want to point that out. I think in the grander scheme, if we do that, I would also love to look at those areas that are not in the redevelopable and try to understand why they're not, if that's because they're currently single family in single family zones, or like how we can kind of play with that as well. Because like if you look out 2 roads over, like the idea of like we want to be a small town, it might make more sense for some density to increase rather than expanding, and in those areas not colored as redevelopable, I'd be interested to see if a zoning change would create them to be redevelopable in the future.
Yes, so by increasing density, or allowing more dense unit types within some of your zones, all of a sudden the calculus on like what is highest and best use changes.
Yep.
Right? So yes, you could absolutely adjust capacity by adjusting what you allow within your different zoning districts. So increasing density would definitely flip the scale on some of these parcels.
Because my thing with that, and also kind of along with yours, like it's only going to happen if the people who currently own that plot of land want it to happen.
Yeah.
Where like if we expand, like I feel like as we expand, then it's more certain that we're going to become a larger city.
Yes.
Where if we change the zoning, then it's only when that property is sold. So if it does change, it'll change slowly, but it's less likely to lose the character.
Yes, and we could still hit our numbers for the purposes
Yeah.
of this exercise. I think that's true. My 2 blocks are right next to Parkside, and they were zoned multifamily because the church, the Presbyterian Church, got some grant funding to develop this Hope House thing, which is like kind of like a single family residence that's used for community events, and it's kind of like a temporary shelter sort of. And so they had to rezone the whole block. My block's been zoned multifamily for over a decade, and there are new multifamily structures on my lot, and so it's doing a good job towards helping us with our numbers, you know, in the same way that we're talking about. I think like we could, you know, rezone some other areas. Could we not just solve the problem with some different highlighters.
You could and say, the market will decide whether this should actually be multifamily or not, much as it has decided that is not the case on your block.
For
right?
now, yeah.
For now, but
Yeah.
there might be a time, sometime in the 20-year.
I mean, when
horizon
they
this
built
plan.
some townhomes across the street for me, and I did think like, well, maybe I could sell my house and grow some townhomes on mine.
The
Why-
final harvest.
Why not? But I mean, I don't know. I personally prefer that to spreading out, but I guess that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, well, and so let me continue through the presentation. I'll so we talked about. I'm sorry, I forgot which slide we had gotten to.
We were on
Step
that
3.
Yes. Okay. So we have what our allocation target is, what we need to accommodate. We have the unit capacity shown here, and we can see that we've got a surplus, more or less, within the lower income units, and more deficits in the higher income units. So we're primarily focused on what we can do to serve the 80% AMI plus categories. There are some different ways that we can do that, and I will talk about those now. So first idea is an expansion of the UGA. Right now, Tenino's UGA is very tiny. I don't think that there is a way forward that doesn't include some amount of UGA expansion, just because the amount of UGA that you have left after annexing West Tenino is just, it's like a handful of acres. So there is the need to consider an expansion. What exactly that expansion looks like remains to be seen. The other option is to increase density inside city limits, and that can be done a variety of ways. You could raise the density cap. You could look at authorizing middle housing types, which are kind of in between what we think of as like high-rise apartments and a single-family house. I've brought some more information about middle housing to talk about this time. So there are some options to increase your capacity within the city without expanding the UGA too far. So we've got some new conceptual areas for the UGA expansion to talk about based on our discussion last time. So we have brought back the south scenario. We've taken a pass on the north and east scenarios, and we've brought forward the west of West Tenino scenario and the Marina Acres scenario that we discussed last time. The development potential that we're looking at generally is based on single-family development within this, potentially at a greater density than is currently present or currently allowed. We also provided some very, very rough order of magnitude cost estimates that would include things like site prep, erosion control, utility extensions, et cetera, that would make development at an urban level feasible.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So when you expand the UGA, you have to anticipate expansion of utilities.
Okay.
What do you actually have to expand utilities?
No. So if you're in the urban growth area, you're designated essentially as a place that could in the future be annexed and start to receive some level of urban growth. But in the short term, being in the UGA still means you're in the unincorporated county and you're developing according to county standards, which means that you could have water and sewer available to you, but if you don't, you can also use a well and a septic system. It's also entirely possible to have a developer pay for those utility extensions versus the city having to make some kind of investment in infrastructure.
That was kind of where I was getting at too.
So in the UGA, you don't pay any city taxes too, right? Or you do?
Who owns the UGA?
The UGA is owned by the county.
And the county is responsible for like emergency services?
Barring any other agreements with the city, yes. So Yeah, I think you're taxed the same in the UGA as outside of the UGA, provided you're not incorporated. I don't think that you're paying into any city taxes unless perhaps there is a utility extension and you are connected, then you would pay for those services. So being in the UGA makes you eligible to have like municipal services extended to your property, whereas if you're not in the UGA, that's not possible under state law. Like Mima Acres, for example, could have access to water and sewer if somebody built an extension, and then, you know, if people chose to connect, they would pay their connection fees and they would pay for all of their utility stuff.
Would it be permissible for us to only add to the UGA the top part of Mima Acres, or is it an
Yes.
all or nothing?
No, it's not all or nothing, and this is one of the things that I want to talk about when we get to Mima Acres. So we talked about South last time. This accommodates about 350 units. The infrastructure cost is around $2.7 million in 2024 dollars to do that. Mima Acres, so we looked at all of Mima Acres. This is a huge amount of space and a huge amount of capacity that is far, far, far exceeding what Tenino's allocations are.
It's kind of like all we would ever need, isn't it?
Yes, there is some logical sense in planning for the entire thing, right? It's all pretty well contained. There's the one road, but it is way more land than is necessary.
But we'll have to be revisiting the same thing in
Yeah, in
7 years, right?
in
Or
10
whenever,
years,
like
yeah.
when the projections change.
We might be talking about adding another slice of Mima Acres into the UGA if we don't put the whole thing in now. The state law says you need to have a UGA that is sized according to the capacity that you're planning for plus a reasonable market factor. I think that this is probably not going to meet that test, and the county would probably want us to take on less, but there are some logistical issues with that, like road maintenance and stuff like that. So there would be some agreements between the city and the county that would need to take place to work out what some of those things look like. All of that is achievable, but I suspect we're probably going to wind up with like a third to a half of Mima Acres.
Which would still be way more than we need,
It's
right?
a lot. It's going to be a lot.
Because those are 10-acre lots generally, or?
Yeah, they're pretty big. Obviously, on the east side, there are a lot of critical areas things to contend with. The whole thing is in preferred pocket gopher soils. We know that pocket gophers aren't present in all of it. We have the information from the ag park parcel, especially for the north end, to make some general assumptions. But like on the east side, we know that there are some pretty big critical areas constraints. We can probably make a justification to, let me see if yes. I would say we could probably make a justification to like somewhere around here.
So I have a couple questions, and so, well, first, I think if we do Mima Acres, I personally, for the benefit of everyone, think as wild as it is to take the whole thing. Because if in the next 10 years, the top part is annexed, we have now created what the county calls oh my God, what are they called? Anyway, we've created an island where the top part will be serviced by the city for all emergency services. And then the last part, every time that person calls 911, the
That's where
county
we make a deal with the county, so we patrol it and get some money from the county, right?
Yeah,
We
like
provide services and they
it
pay us.
it would make sense to perform those services, assuming that there's staff capacity to do it, to perform those services on behalf of the county. It's one of the things that would need to be worked out.
Yeah. I will say from my experience, that relationship does not typically go that way. The sheriff has agreements with like Rainier to patrol Rainier, but the islands that exist in Lacey the sheriff is the person in charge of those. They hate it because it's literally like an island in the middle of Lacey. And I feel like for the benefit, I don't know that I'm sold on my makers. I think the whole thing is going to make the idea of Tenino ridiculous.
You mean what, in terms of building in that area?
Yeah. One, the idea that the whole thing is in pocket gopher soil, we're either going to then have to find HCP land so that way any of this is even developable, or we're just doing this and nothing's ever going to get built, which might be the goal of the whole thing, but
well, we know that the Ag Business Park and the water treatment plant don't have pocket gophers, or at least didn't when we had the surveys
Yeah.
done. And as you get closer to the floodplain, I'm sure that decreased presence continues because of what they like.
yeah.
They like dry, prairie soils, and it gets less of that as you go towards the river, obviously.
Yeah.
If there are trees and understory, they're not going to be there. I'm just telling you, they're not going to be there.
Yeah.
But, so I get what you're saying. I think its
Otherwise,
proximity to the utilities, in spite of the big number for developing the whole thing, would
Yeah.
actually be the cheapest place we could expand to, because we have the sewer main and water mains are in 507 right there.
yeah. Well, it's gonna cost the same no matter what, because the cost of pipe is gonna cost the same regardless if it's at the end of the UG or at the
But
end.
as opposed to going like all the way down Crowder or something like that, where there's the closest thing is at, Park Street, the closest infrastructure, sewer and water is going to be on Park, right?
Well, like the proximity to the treatment plant does not actually affect the cost of putting
No,
in
but the
utility.
proximity of the big line is what I'm talking about, because our sewer is pressurized system
Yeah.
or whatever, where we have individual grinder pumps. So as you get further away from the heart of the system, the lines get smaller
Gotcha.
to like a
I
2
understand what
inch,
you're
and so
saying.
you couldn't continue off. Like certain places in Tenino are stubbed off in a way that you couldn't continue without ripping all the lines up and putting a big one in. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so there's that to consider. So we have
Yeah.
the biggest possible sewer line in that spot.
That
And
makes
so
sense. I did
coming
not
off
know
that, you don't have to go back and
Yeah.
put bigger line in all the way back up to the next biggest line.
Yeah,
The
that
big
makes-
line's right there.
That does make sense. I did not realize that.
But that's the only reason. That's one of the reasons that I've been thinking that's a good way to go. There could be pocket gophers. I don't know. Maybe that would ruin the whole thing. But again, we're just fulfilling the requirements of
Yeah.
these numbers to a certain extent.
Yeah, literally,
For me.
we're just playing a game, and it's like,
A little bit.
yeah,
I mean, we don't know that anybody's going to develop any of these things necessarily. And we're mostly looking for houses for, higher income
Single-family.
people in general who can kind of do what
Yeah.
they want to do, I think.
that's true.
I don't know. Continue.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Then last time we also talked about a west of West Tenino expansion scenario. The land between the Conservancy properties, or up to the Conservancy property, was, I think, the direction that I recalled. So this is another pretty large area that we considered. It's difficult to think that the county would accept something this big, although it is just a few very large parcels. The infrastructure costs are substantial, so unlike Mima Acres, where the infrastructure cost is reflective of kind of serving this entire existing development from utilities that are present along the highway, the west of West Tenino would have us bringing those utilities further out. So there would be some like main extensions. this cost would not go down the same way that this cost would go down if the area of the UGA expansion were smaller. Right?
Yeah,
So this
you
is
have to
always
go
going to
down
be
99 for a
yeah,
minute.
this is always going to be a more expensive scenario for from an infrastructure perspective. This has the same issues related to pocket gopher soils. It suffers from the same issue that the east scenario had, where it's going to be kind of a satellite because of all of the West Tenino space that's not ever going to develop at an urban density. So it's we brought it for consideration. I think it's not my most recommended scenario to proceed with. What I'd like to do of the three scenarios is to explore this one further with the county, with TRPC, and also in a public survey when we send that out. So we're finalizing the vision questions, and it would be great to probe some questions related to this expansion scenario at that time. So that would be my recommendation, and I would love kind of a thumbs up or thumbs down on that approach. And if we want to bring either the south or the west of West Tenino scenario to the county, we can do that. I suspect that they're going to be happiest with a smaller version of Mima Acres.
I like Mima Acres personally. Also, I'll add that at the end of Mima Acres, you know, to the left of the end of the orange area is Miles Sand and Gravel, and they've expressed interest in developing at some point too, and then you'd have yourself a loop. Amazing.
Yeah. I mean the whole quarry area right now. You know, it seems like there's still reserves in there, but
I mean, by the time we get to the end though, in 50 years, they'll probably be ready.
yeah. Well, and
What
what Dan was telling me is that they've burned through a lot in recent years, and if their current pace of production sustains that, then it might not take that long before they're functionally exhausted.
What about the piece of property right next to the egg park? Like the front of Miles
That's
Sand and
Miles
Gravels.
Sand and Gravel too.
Yeah, this can't you see it? Sorry. Let's see. So you're talking about like
Yeah.
this area? Yeah. This is the same.
What are those orange lines everywhere? Right there.
These are the steep slopes.
Oh, those
'Cause
are
it's a-
steep.
I know, it's
the
very
mounds.
weird. I know, it's very weird on the quarry. Yeah, they've got their, you know, they have their piles
Oh, I
piled
see.
up. They have cuts. They have wash ponds that migrate.
Got
You
ya,
know,
got ya.
yeah.
Alright. Sorry.
I worked on some other gravel quarry projects like up in Redmond, and it's all very weird mapping. Don't pay no attention to the man behind the curtain on that parcel. But yeah, this is all the quarry. They have expressed some interest in potential annexation. The suggestion, while it's still an active quarry with a lot of production, is to keep that in the county, for the county to manage their conditional use permit and enforcing conditions and all of that. But as they're winding down, to talk with them about how redevelopment on that could occur and when it makes sense to bring them in. And the Mima Acres UGA expansion would prime them really well for that, as they're kind of becoming enclosed by Tenino.
So what is the danger of expanding too much in the, like, because the UGA has to meet the urban growth need. So if 10 years from now we've created this UGA for Mima Acres, Miles Sand and Gravel says we want to close down, build houses here, what is the danger that the UGA expansion of Mima Acres is going to prevent Miles Sand and Gravel 10 years from now from becoming part of the UGA because we haven't met the availability in our UGA?
I would say if they came in with a development plan that said, you know, we want to build this many units, here's how it's going to be phased, here are the other uses that are going to be on site, here's our infrastructure plan, whatever, they bring like a feasible development plan forward, I don't think there's any barrier. Yeah.
I just don't want us to shoot ourselves in the foot.
Yeah, and that's another reason not to try and take all of MIMA acres, but to take a smaller chunk of MIMA acres. Again, state law says you should size your UGA for your planned growth plus a reasonable market factor. A reasonable market factor when we're talking, 300 units is not 1,100.
Yeah.
Right. So that the county is probably gonna ask us to shrink that anyway.
Yeah.
And then, down the line, 10 years from now, whatever, we can revisit this exercise for a different UGA amendment. It's also very possible to give UGA back, right?
Yeah.
If things aren't developing correctly, nobody in MIMA Acres has been able to consolidate enough property or find a developer interested or whatever. Like, it's entirely possible that we guessed wrong and this isn't where development is most likely to occur, and so we could relinquish MIMA Acres and establish a different UGA elsewhere. I mean, I don't foresee that happening, but it's possible. So if Miles Sand and Gravel wanted to redevelop, if MIMA Acres isn't redeveloping, could potentially just do a switcheroo at that point too.
So now I have another question.
Yeah.
Say we go through the MIMA Acres UGA expansion. How does it get zoned?
It'll probably be zoned one of the single family designations. I think we'll explore this more, but we might do the SFES on the east side and then the conventional single family on the west side, just because we do have the flood hazard area taking up so much of the east side.
Good. And then, sorry, one more question. The CPAT obviously did all of this environmental analysis work. If we're moving forward with this, is that going to cause issues for the climate policy element?
It shouldn't have any direct implications for the acceptability of the element insofar as like turning it into the county. But there's potentially something to be said about how developing in a critical area prone area is somewhat in conflict with policies that may say like we're going to avoid developing in critical prone areas,
But most of the parcels on the east side have at least some buildable aspect to them, it looks like.
Yeah, I think there are. It's a little tough to see these. There are a couple of parcels right here that have very little developable area according to the mapping, and any redevelopment on these parcels would have a site-specific analysis that would fine-tune what the boundary of that is. But looking at this, this wetland and buffer area is nearly touching MIMA Acres Drive. Similar with some of the buffer areas down here. Any of those parcels would naturally have less development on there because there are already critical areas regulations that are protecting those, and you're kind of stuck with the minimum reasonably necessary for fulfilling the economic purposes of your lot.
We could do like higher densities on the west side of the road with a developer in exchange for.
Do we own the zoning, or does the county own the zoning for UGA?
So, it's a great question. I believe that some communities have an executed interlocal agreement that gives the city official control over the zoning in the UGA. I don't think that Tenino has an ILA with Thurston County. I don't think that Thurston County has required it.
Is that like the joint code update that the county is doing with like the city of Olympia and the city of Lacey? Or is that different?
I'm not entirely sure. I'm not familiar with that project. So I'm working on a project in the city of Vader where Lewis County is requiring jurisdictions who want to directly control development in their UGAs to sign an interlocal agreement. And that really clearly spells out who controls land use planning and zoning within the UGA, and it's the city. In that ILA, I think most other places, it's more of a like de facto thing. State law really contemplates that the city would be planning for all of the goings on in the UGA because they're the ones that are eventually going to be servicing it and whatnot. So it makes sense that you're controlling what is happening in those areas. But I don't think that there's a formal agreement. But I think that historically Tenino is just doing it.
Good.
Which is it's very common.
So with the 1,100 units in the Mima acres that are estimated, is that in the developable area, or is that once we eliminate the flood area? So basically what I'm saying is, are we saying it's basically 1,100 additional units on the west side of the road only? Or is that if we take the entire property? Because it would look to me that there's, if you fit 1,100 homes in that entire space, you're really only gonna get 500 or 600 out of it because of how much of that is flood.
Yeah, this is after deducting the critical areas stuff, and
Okay.
we're looking at densities similar.
If you broke those up into city lots, there would be a
Similar-
number of, like,
Similar to this development,
0.17 acre lots.
Yeah.
right? So
I
we're thinking
figured
about
as
the
much.
kinds of single-family development that's consistent with this project that happened relatively
Oh,
recently.
yeah.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can't even
There's
see
that
the
little
lines.
street, yeah.
There's this little teeny tiny guy right here. So sorry, I can't use the laser pointer while I've got it zoomed in. So sorry
Yeah.
about that. But like that's
Yeah,
a relatively
okay.
new
Basically,
development.
Like each
Yeah,
parcel
every-
is a whole.
Every parcel's a
meadow.
whole neighborhood.
Right.
Whole
I was gonna say
neighborhood.
that's
Like you can
that description
imagine,
helps
you can imagine,
paint
and
the
like
Yeah.
yeah, because of the geometry of some of the lots compared to the infrastructure and the critical areas buffers, like realistically, it's probably somewhat less than 1,100, but like at the ability or at the scale that we're able to analyze it right now, this is it's based on like net land area, so it doesn't really account for that, but it's probably not dramatically far off. But yeah, so imagine like 2 lots would make something a little bit bigger than Hidden Meadows.
Yeah, I just had to wrap my head around the
Yeah.
scale here. But okay. So the other question that I was going to have probably for the other commissioners here. So the south scenario, we're just basically saying it's less appealing as far as potential.
There's
Because it is. I mean, if we're worried about
I mean,
utility
I would say
cost,
there are a lot of new houses on 10-acre lots in that area. I don't know when they're going to get redeveloped. Have you been over there, like on the south side of
yeah,
the hill?
yeah.
I mean, there's a fair number. It's getting fairly dense over there. I mean, with newer stuff.
Yeah. And there's also like the railroad goes right through that.
Uh-huh.
So again, we're just playing a game of who cares how much feasibility there is in this. But like no one's gonna want to build apartments or single dwelling homes right next to the train track.
Undesirable.
Yeah.
It's probably not. That's true.
No, I just wanted to just kind of talk it through a little.
Plus I
bit,
do
so.
think a lot of the property on the right side is owned by the railroad. Because if I remember, like most of that is, and the size is really throwing me off. Because until you showed what Hidden Meadows was, but like I'm pretty sure most of that is that basically from. Wait a minute, no.
It's hard to.
Now I'm so confused.
yeah. Well, so here's Hidden Meadows again.
You
Because-
see,
right?
you see
No,
the dotted
no.
line up there is the park.
Yeah, never mind.
basically,
Because
and-
Crowder,
Yeah.
Crowder and 507 are. Yeah, never mind.
Yeah,
Because the train track is between 507 and Crowder.
yes, it does. The track runs right through there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're talking about the purple area now.
Okay.
Yeah, because I was like, oh, most of that's train track, but actually, no, just that tiny little in between is train track.
Yeah, the little strip in between is
Yeah.
the highway and the rail right of way. So you've got plenty of developable space on both sides. But there's, I mean, yeah, access might be a little bit weird. Ownership might be a little bit weird. There's a weird, like, I'm
that's
not
so
sure what
funny.
that one like long skinny parcel is. That might be old rail or some old right of way that exists. So yeah, this scenario or this scenario seems a little bit less flexible than the Magna Acres scenario. There are some constraints that we would need to work through, but I mean it's still viable.
Well, I just wanted to mention it and kind of talk it through a
Yeah,
little bit.
no, it makes
Simply because I think Mima Acres is probably the most flexible option that we have here, especially when it's just like, okay, we'll cut it off right in the middle and then we'll take everything, to the north of there. And then, I do think there's something interesting as far as, county and servicing that area. But I think that's something for another body to work on, maybe not us, right? So we just create the problems and then somebody else cleans up after. But no, I think I'm on board
I think
with
it happens all the time. I
Yeah.
don't think it's that weird. I don't know.
I'm on board with the Mima Acres. I just wanted to kind of go over the south one.
Okay. Then it sounds like we're at consensus where this is going to be our preferred scenario. We'll start probing this with public opinion and with the county and with TRPC and understand a little bit more about what their expectations will be and move forward from there. Okay.
In the future, if you bring this map back, I would just be curious how many of those parcels currently have development on them. And it's not important for right now, but I'm just curious, like, what percentage of that currently has been developed and how much of it is sitting either as someone didn't deem it to be, or the person doesn't actually want to develop, or
Yeah, I mean, it's very low density. There are
Yeah.
some vacant lots. You can't see. This is, sorry.
no, you're fine.
Let me take this down.
I think there's something on most of them, some kind of structure.
I'm sorry, I don't use this kind of
No, you're fine.
sharing. Here we go. Okay, here we go. So this is the 2022 aerial. You can see that it's very low density,
Yeah.
like agricultural scale, small or like very rural.
Let's look over at the south scenario since you have this aerial photo. I mean, let's look at it on this aerial photo. So there's Blue Mauer, so it's north of Blue Mauer. It's that whole area.
Yeah, this area here.
I don't feel like that's a horrible idea. I feel like it.
No. Can you zoom in a little bit more?
The other thing I was thinking is
Yeah.
maybe perhaps more of a short term. It's a short term fix because you're pretty capped with the 340 units, I believe, is the number.
It was 350, might be less. Yeah.
I do think it's an interesting concept because the closest cities are west and north, and then to go south, it's like we're not necessarily moving towards the cities.
What about Bucota, man?
Sorry.
Yeah, that's true. It's true. It seems like we're moving away from the direction that other cities are expanding towards us.
Yeah.
Running away a bit.
Well, they're also nobody's expanding into Mima Acres. I'm just throwing that out.
Mhm.
Good point.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like my makers makes the most sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I do want to do a quick time check. It is 7:25, 7:24. Do you guys typically have a pretty firm stop at 7? Do we need to wrap it up?
We do.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that we
Oh,
had.
yeah.
a
No, I'm
rule about
asking.
that.
I'm asking.
Oh.
Do you?
I like it.
No, no, I
I-
feel like honestly we just go until we're done, and sometimes that's 7.
It doesn't
and
matter.
Sometimes it's
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I have some clients that are like, when the meeting is over, like it doesn't matter. We're stopping.
Oh.
Oh.
And some that are just like,
No, we don't have a set in time,
okay.
although.
I'm gonna do a speed run through middle housing, and
Okay.
if there's more discussion to follow on, we can flesh that out next time too.
Okay.
All right, so this would be an option to support more infill development. So first, what is middle housing? Middle housing is the colorful portion of this graphic. So it's smaller scale but higher density units that are more consistent with a single family home, more consistent with the character and scale of a single family home. So on the lowest density side of this scale, you have duplexes, 3plexes, 4plexes. Included in here are certain kinds of cottage developments, older style, like walk-up apartments, the smaller apartment buildings. And then as you get to higher density, you're seeing townhouses, higher density multiplexes, and a little bit higher density apartment buildings, but not anything like the mid or high-rise apartments that we typically think of as like very common development projects today.
Can I ask an obnoxious question for you?
Absolutely.
Okay, so, because last time we talked about the building height requirement, or the building height limit, and had a discussion about that. So, the way I'm looking at it, as far as, at least what the height requirement is concerned, we're looking at like the townhouses are about the current cutoff, right, for what's permissible
Like they're
within
all
the
3
city.
stories in that middle housing, is that what you mean?
Yeah, as soon as you get to the multiplex and the triplex here, on the far end, it's closer to the mid-rise, those are getting to be too high, it looks like, to
Those-
be permissible.
I mean, there's a range within each of these typologies, but
Okay.
generally speaking, yes, some of the higher density middle housing types are likely not gonna fit, even if you allow them, they're likely not gonna fit in the current height limitations that the city has. There are some that might be marginal, so if you selectively allowed a kind of height increase, then they might work. Or if you allowed like mechanical equipment to protrude above the height limit, something like that might get you a couple more typologies, but generally speaking, yeah, you're gonna have side-by-side plexes, duplexes that are either side-by-side or stacked. You're gonna have the very small walk-up style apartments. You're gonna have townhouses, and you're gonna have cottages.
Gotcha.
Okay. So when we talk about middle housing, it's middle in these two ways. So it's like it's an in-between building type that is kind of somewhere between a detached single-family house and an apartment building. That includes both the form of the building and the overall scale of the building in relation to other development. It also is middle in terms of who it serves, in terms of affordability levels, right? So this provides a greater range of options for people that can't necessarily afford the detached residential. That said, going back to this, there are some like luxury versions of some of these kinds of middle housing that absolutely serve some of the higher income brackets that we talk about. You can look up cottage courts in like Kirkland and Redmond, and they're selling for well over $1 million, the same as any other kind of detached residential house up there. You know, people are building things that kind of cross between affordability levels, even in these types of housing that are typically supposed to be a little bit more affordable for people. All right, so what does it look like? It's often described as gentle infill, so it's something that is typically seen as very compatible with the form and scale of single-family residential. You can see here what certain kinds of units might look like in a typical residential block that has some vacancy. So, you know, 2 lots here made a little 5-unit cottage development. There's like a plex. I'm not sure how many units this represents. Maybe 3-unit plexes here, 4-unit plexes. But you can see that it is very similar in scale and in street frontage to what a single-family residential house would look like, and we can also adopt regulations or guidelines that ensure that that is the case, that people are designing their buildings so that they do fit in to the context and respond well to the existing architecture in a community. So not only could you enable these types of units, you can also do a lot to control what they look like and how they fit.
Sorry, can I ask a quick question? So, middle housing addresses both rentals and ownership, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll go back again. So you'll see a lot of ownership options in duplex, in cottages, and in townhouses. You'll see a lot of rental in the higher density plexes, in the smaller apartment buildings. You'll also see rentals in the duplex, you know, of course, but yeah, so it would serve both markets. There are a lot of benefits to middle housing. It provides a lot of options for different kinds of families or different life stages. If people want to remain in their community but want something smaller than their big old detached house with their big old lot, then you know there's a great option for something smaller. There are also some opportunities for moderate density infill that will help achieve our housing allocation targets. A little bit greater density can encourage a more vibrant street life that can attract additional businesses, push for more active transportation infrastructure, that kind of thing. It does a lot to preserve neighborhood character because it does fit really effectively into that. So instead of trying to encourage redevelopment at a higher density, allowing these kinds of middle housing options can create more density, while also responding well to the character of the community as it is. So we identified, as you have already gathered,
Wow, way to ruin our
this
slide.
I know. Thanks, guys. So we've identified this side of the spectrum as likely to be most appropriate for Tenino, given the preference to maintain the current height limitations and to respond to the current level of development within the community. This includes everything pretty much up to the townhouse, maybe some of the multiplex in certain areas, but generally speaking, the lower density side of the spectrum. And then here are some examples of what those things might look like. And let me zoom in on this since it's a little tough to read. But you can see that a lot of these look kind of like a house. The townhouse project that's shown here is maybe a little bit higher density or bigger scale than what might be appropriate for Tenino, but could fit in some areas potentially. Same with this larger multiplex. These are some built examples of what these kinds of units could look like And I think you can see that the architecture is really similar to what a single-family residence would look like in many cases. There's some, we don't see a lot of this kind of brick building development, but the materials are pretty similar. It can fit really well into the existing build character of the community. You do already allow some kinds of middle housing in some of your zones. The multifamily and the commercial zones allow many of these either by right or with an administrative use permit. So we would
And that's a hearing examiner?
the administrative use permit, I think, is administrative discretionary. So I don't think it
Okay.
requires a public hearing, but it does
Yeah.
require public
It's
notice.
just us.
Gotcha.
I mean, just the planner, right?
Gotcha.
So we would be talking about allowing some or all of these either by right or with an administrative use permit within the single-family zones as well. There are some ways that we can accomplish this. We can consider establishing an infill overlay. You already got some overlays in your community, so we can use that same tool. We can allow some things by right, including applying some specific requirements or conditions to that kind of development. We could offer incentives to encourage people to build that development. Something like a circumstantial height bonus or something could be an example. And we could consider potentially broadening mixed-use zoning to support it as well. We can explore that more as we go through this process. To do it, we would need to integrate middle housing both into the comprehensive plan as well as execute some zoning updates, some zoning code updates, potentially also developing some design guidelines, although those could certainly be codified instead, and they can be fairly simple, provided they are clear and objective. And then we also will want to make sure that we are accounting for preservation where that's appropriate. You guys already have a historic district overlay that does some amount of preservation, but we want to make sure that we're not losing a lot of housing stock that is affordable at different levels to any kind of new development that might be more expensive and therefore displace those people.
Mixed use zoning, is that taking commercial and turning it into mixed use, or is that taking residential and turning it into mixed use?
It could
the
be
most
either.
common?
My favorite option is to allow some amount of commercial in residential neighborhoods, things like the corner coffee shop. That's a great example. I love to walk to the coffee shop across the street from my neighborhood. There are some other uses that are pretty compatible with residential neighborhoods that are great, a small corner market, something like that. You could also go the other direction. Sometimes there can be concern about displacing commercial uses or not allowing for construction of commercial space that meets future demand because it's all become residential.
Gotcha.
How would you, let's say you wanted to have a mixed, and you wanted your coffee shop on the corner in a single family area, how would you do that? No, aren't those usually like already there, and then they're just already there as a commercial building in the middle of a residential area, but how would you say, we want this lot to be mixed use, or would you have to do the whole block, right? Or you have to do like some
No.
amount of,
You can do like you often see like nodes where you do kind of the intersection. So you don't necessarily do the whole block, but you do like all four corners of the intersection or 3 out of 4 corners of an intersection.
I see.
Interesting.
So yeah, you have like enough space to allow that kind of node to develop with some of those uses. Not all of them are going to develop into a mixed use project. Some of them might be a mixed use project in and of themselves, where you've got a coffee shop on the ground floor and an apartment or two above. there are a lot of ways that it can appear, but it doesn't have to be a whole block. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be something that was already there. People convert houses to commercial businesses all the time, or they might knock
Right.
something down and put something up that meets their needs.
I see, yes.
Okay. All right, we're reaching the end. So we have some next steps. I already mentioned with the land use scenario, we will be addressing some reference-related questions in the community survey. We'll also start some conversations with Thurston County. They'll need to buy off on that UGA expansion, and with TRPC to start talking through how that might affect the land capacity analysis.
Do you think that you'll start with showing them the whole Mima Acres thing and let them say no, or do you think you'll start with just a bit?
I think we'll start with the whole thing and say, we've analyzed this, we'd like to come to a mutual agreement on.
I see.
The big ask.
Right, I got it, yeah.
Total extent. So I won't go in and say,
Just curious.
this is gonna be our new
This is
UGA.
it.
I'll say, here's what we're thinking, this is a lot, what is gonna fit for both of our requirements. Yeah, so with that, then we will be we'll be moving forward with that land use scenario, and we will use that to continue advancing our land use goals and policies, our housing goals and policies, and really start working on updates to the elements going forward. My last slide is just the usual question slide.
So when I was looking at this map here, accommodating middle housing, a fairly significant, I'd like to hear.
This is your current zoning map. We
Yes.
have not added anything to this.
Yes.
It's not your fault.
Just let me
So in a lot of the residential areas, it looks like it's zoned single family or single family duplex.
Mhm.
That's right.
Was there, what was everybody's thoughts about incorporating some additional multifamily into those single family areas? I know, Will, you said you happen to be in an area that
Yeah.
got added to the
Just I live on Central and Stage, so right across the street from Parkside.
okay.
He's like right.
In that purple school.
Yeah,
area,
yeah, right in there. But you hadn't seen any development recently from.
I mean, they built a new single-family house on my block, but not
Yeah.
town.
But not like
multifamily.
any multifamily stuff.
I don't.
So-
I don't see it ever happening on my block. And maybe the Hope House lot. But
Yeah.
the church is the one that sold the lot that they built the new house on. So
Okay.
that kind of took away their ability to do more than just the one.
It could also just be like a developer might be interested and isn't able to get enough lots to make a project feasible.
Yeah. I mean, the house behind me is an older house that they just fixed up, so I don't think that's going anywhere.
Yeah, I guess my question is, going forward, is development of these single-family homes into any multifamily place, do you guys see any interest in that in the development space for Tenino? Or is it more like, we're looking at more like newer neighborhoods, like that one that was on the edge of town, what is that one called again?
Hidden
In-
Meadows,
Hidden Meadows.
Yes, Hidden Meadows.
or down the end of Park towards Linear, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I personally, I just love that our zoning is every color that could ever be imagined, because there's so many options.
This is not the worst
That
I've
is-
seen. This is
that
a
is actually
pretty
very
reasonable. This is a pretty
Yeah.
reasonable number of zones, all things considered.
I am very much in favor of doing more infill in the manner of converting single family into multifamily.
Mm-hmm.
I think if we create the right boundaries, then people won't notice that things are changing, but we'll be able to allow more people here. In my opinion, allowing more people here will bring more money here, more taxes, and will be for the benefit of everyone without having people freaking out over too much expansion. I feel like for a large portion of the single family, where those houses are located at, moving some of them into multifamily will not actually, will have the same effect as Will's property does. Like, they're not going to transition, but the opportunity for that in the future, I think, will be beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like all of the left hand part,
West side.
yeah.
And stuff.
No, sorry.
West and
Right
right now.
left.
Oh, sorry, my other left. I was
Like,
like, yeah, we're talking about,
I-
over here.
yes.
That bit, where is that? The striped area there? That's probably not what you're
Which,
talking about.
are you talking about the purple stripe or the?
That one,
Gray
yes. Where
stripe?
is that? I don't even know where that is, honestly.
That is on the, west side
Of the
the
tracks?
tracks, yes.
Is that developable?
Is that like the
It's like-
hill?
It's like where Scatter Creek is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so this is your environmentally sensitive.
Ah, yes, of
So-
course. Oh, yes, of course. Right.
You can see the same up here. Yeah, so this is like pretty low
That's like not actually
density. There's not gonna be a lot of development there. But in, back to my laser pointer.
I mean, I
This
think if we
area
were gonna
would
do
be-
that, then it makes the most sense then to also, like my block on Central, you know, it's the next step away from Sussex, you know.
Yeah.
And it makes sense to allow multifamily
Yeah.
near where there are things.
Yeah. Well, and I am not in favor of changing all single family to multi-family.
Sure.
But I
Yeah.
would be in favor of really analyzing a majority of it and seeing,
Where does it make sense?
yeah,
Like on Lincoln,
Yeah.
and Central, you know, really there are some houses down towards Ritter that are really old and small.
Yeah.
And they're really close to like the gas station and the back of the Eagles and the bar and stuff. And then on Lincoln, there are those dilapidated houses that guy's been talking about. Where they're on like 4 lots, 2 old
Yeah.
houses on 4 lots. He wants to do multifamily there, but I don't think that it
Yeah,
is
and
zone multifamily.
whatever 143rd turns into,
McDuff or whatever.
yeah, like, I think a lot of that is newer, but I think at the same time, there are some older houses in that would, I think, benefit from it. And really, if we have guidelines of your structure has to meet the architectural look that's already in town, no one's really gonna notice.
Yeah.
And any kind of development would still have to meet setback requirements, height requirements, so it's still gonna have to fit in the same box that any single-family
Yeah.
residential development would need to fit into. Like for example, a duplex might not even be recognizable as a duplex to a casual observer.
Yeah, one, my biggest thing is, Tenino is not, and people might feel that this is appropriate and they prefer it this way, but Tenino is not somewhere that like new, young, like a kid who graduates Tenino High School is not going to get an apartment in Tenino. Like, there are no apartments that are for young people. So the idea that,
Not affordable.
yeah. So if we increase the availability of like duplexes or townhouses, then potentially we're going to allow that adjustment of younger people being able to live here. And I think that is also beneficial for
Yeah.
the community.
I'm not sure how you get affordable. I'm still like struggling with how we get affordable housing.
Yeah.
That's what you're talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
How do you get it? Like they built those townhomes across the street from me. Those are $2,000 a piece a month.
Mhm.
But there are young people living in them. But
Yeah.
I mean, they're paying more than I pay for my mortgage.
I think affordable housing is a
I'm not sure, like, if you build a duplex, is somebody gonna want less than 2,000 per side for that? I don't know.
Well, I think you got to
I'd be surprised.
define what exactly affordable is, right? Because $2,000 a month for basically a townhome,
I mean, that sounds
that's
pretty
pretty affordable when you
Yeah,
start to.
for,
Well, yeah,
for
that's-
a,
so-
like a
That's what I'm saying though, but if you just got out of high school and you just got your first job and you're working at Dave's or
Right.
whatever, or something like,
So
you're not gonna be living in there, those, I don't think, but.
maybe with
before-
roommates, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
right, you could.
Yeah.
Before I moved here, I was in Tumwater at a 3-story apartment building, and we had a 500 square foot, 1-bedroom apartment, right? And it was nice for us. We didn't need much space, but that alone was $1,500 a month.
Yeah.
And I'm living, there's a central hallway, and it's basically looking like a hotel, right?
Right,
Everybody's
right.
got their own door, and so, that was the most affordable thing that I could find, was $1,500 a month, in and around, without finding like some private individual who has rents to like a couple of people.
Yeah, doing a nice favor for people.
Yeah.
Yeah, doing a nice favor for young people, but so when I think of affordable, right now I'm thinking $1,500 a month. That's affordable, right? So how do you encourage a building? Because the only way, I don't know what the profit margins are on these huge apartment complexes,
I think they're
but
hot.
yeah, well,
You're right.
yeah.
You
So-
need to get like a Homes First or a Habitat for Humanity or somebody like that to build apartments or townhomes or duplexes. I don't know how else you would do it, like, unless there's some altruistic, like,
Mm.
millionaire who just wants to build something for the people, which
Well, and
seems like that's
You
not.
can mandate affordability within your code for projects.
But then they won't build them here, right?
It would.
Talk about an obstacle.
Yeah, it would make it challenging.
Yeah.
There's also a multifamily tax exemption that is authorized under state law that some communities use, so it allows an adjustment to the tax burden for there are 2 options. I think it's like 8 or 12 years. Depending on the level of affordability, and that can help make a project pencil when you do have affordability requirements. So there are some regulatory tools available as well, or you can offer incentives in exchange for affordable units added to a project. That's typically more of a like drop in a bucket kind of approach to adding intentionally affordable units. A lot of communities are looking at how to protect their older housing stock that is naturally just more affordable, although not deeply affordable, and making it easier to update and retrofit older homes.
As rentals or apartments or something.
Yeah, or just to keep them from being demolished and replaced with luxury units that people can't afford.
I see.
Yeah, so like for example, if you've got an older home that's non-conforming to current zoning requirements, allowing an addition that matches that non-conformity in some respect can make it a lot easier for that homeowner to update their house and meet their current needs without selling to a developer and getting out of Dodge.
One in my thought is, if we have more spaces zoned as multifamily that are transitioning to multifamily, then there is potential for an investor to come in and buy 3 lots or 4 lots.
Sure.
So then it is more financially feasible for them to do it quicker, and in theory, then the price is a little bit cheaper. I think also the idea of the whole thing is you have to bring someone who wants to do it here, and I think part of that is we need, I'm going to say this cautiously, we need commercial development in a smart manner that brings a little bit of business here, because if people want to work here, then they'll want to live here, or vice versa, however you want to see it. So I think there is a benefit to analyzing the potential for mixed-use zoning, as well as analyzing the potential for transitioning some of those single-family into multifamily.
Things to consider
Yes.
for our next discussion. Everybody's homework is to think about this.
I do have one more
Yeah.
thought / question as we go into all of this development conversation. I would be interested to see what our current code, and not today, but our current code does towards development of sidewalks or feasibility for like that aspect in new development.
Okay, yeah, I can check what your engineering standards are. Typically, those are gonna live, the like frontage improvement
Yeah.
requirements are gonna live in those standards. So I can bring you some information next time.
Because that was a big thing, like during the climate policy action team, is we talked about most of the city is not very walkable or as walkable as it could be, and that creates an issue for people who then drive from one edge of town to the other rather than go for a walk or things like that. So I'd be interested in see what we have, and I don't necessarily want to make it a burden for development, but I would be interested to see what potential there is for helping sidewalks be developed in those opportunities.
Well, you're in luck. My transportation guy lives in Tenino and is very interested in some similar issues.
Perfect.
So, yeah, I think, and there are some new state requirements. I'm not sure the extent to which they apply to Tenino. I'm not a transportation expert. But there are some new requirements around planning for multimodal level of service, right? So we're may all be familiar with like transportation level of service, which is essentially the measure of like how quickly we're moving cars through an intersection, right? And now there's an acknowledgement that we also need to be thinking clearly about how well we are serving other non-vehicular modes, and so we'll have more conversation about what that looks like. Nobody quite knows what it means because it's not like very well defined. It's still pretty new, but it's out there. People are talking about it. People are trying to figure out what the acceptable approach is for how to do that analysis and do that planning work. So it's an active conversation right now, but it's something that we'll be talking about here too. Yeah. Cool.
Good one.
All right.
All right, is that it?
That's it.
Gentlemen?
All right.
Call it.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
See you.